All right, well, I will go ahead and get started. We'll see a few more people join us as we go, I'm sure, but in the interest of having a long and robust conversation with our panelists, we'll get started. Hello and welcome to everyone joining us today. My name is Karen Freeman. I am the Executive Director of Research here at the Advisory Board for the Arts. And for those of you who have joined us on prior webinars, you know that I often play the role of the behind-the-scenes producer, Q&A moderator for these webinars. But today I'm excited to be the facilitator. As it happens, before joining the Advisory Board for the Arts, I spent years in the HR world, primarily leading learning and development organizations. And so any topic related to diversity, equity, and inclusion is very close to my heart. The topic for our discussion today is diversifying the board, and we are very grateful to have our three guests with us. We have Delia Barker, who's the programs manager at the Roundhouse in London, and then two guests from the AT&T Performing Arts Center in Dallas. We have Matrice Ellis-Kirk, who is the chair, and then Debbie of the board of directors, and then Debbie Story, who is the president and CEO. I'll have a chance for them to introduce themselves in just a moment, but I have a short amount of housekeeping to do, as well as an introduction of a couple of resources, and then we'll dig into the conversation. Today we have a very broad range of organizations in arts and culture and individuals joining us today. So thank you all for joining us. We often have quite a robust conversation in our chat and reflective of the large group of people and broad group of people we have. So I encourage you, if you see some colleagues you're curious to talk to strike up a conversation in the chat and also ask your colleagues questions as well as our panelists. And speaking of that, here is how you do so. I think at this point, most of us are pretty comfortable with Zoom, but just to be sure, I'm going to pass along a few instructions. Please do use the chat box for all of your questions, and you can send them one of two ways, either to the group and encourage that robust conversation I was talking about, or directly to my colleague, Chief Research Officer Pope Ward, and he will be there to accept and consolidate the questions so that we have get to as many of them as possible. So you can send any questions through the chat, both publicly or privately, to Pope. Would love to give everybody a chance to kind of use the chat box and begin a bit of a conversation. So please introduce yourself in the chat box by telling us where you're from in terms of the organization, as well as where in the world you are from. So we can get a great sense of everyone we have here today. While we do that, before I turn to our panelists, and you all can see the great diversity of folks we have on the line today, I want to go through a few resources we have available on our website. You'll see here the link for it, but we recently held a series of check-ins with the CEOs of our nearly 50 member organizations, talking about their priorities for the next 6 months. And I'll say without exception, our members named DE&I as a critical issue to work on right now. So the murder of George Floyd in the US has been a catalyst for global reflection on the work to be done in anti-racism, in equity, and in creating an inclusive environment in the arts. The ABA has responded by creating a set of resources and tools to support arts organizations' efforts, whether it's in setting DE&I goals, in providing staff or board training on implicit bias, in improving community engagement efforts, or, as evidenced by the topic of today's webinar, diversifying the board. So simply head to our website, advisoryarts.com, and you'll see a set of topic centers at the top. Navigate to the DE&I topic center to see the resource, to access the resources that you see here. We will be adding more as we go along, some exclusively for our members, but many available to the arts world as a whole. This is probably a good moment for a note on terminology as well. We do know that words matter in the field of DE&I, and in some cases this terminology varies by region of the globe. So first, I want to note that when we refer to diversity, equity, and inclusion, we mean that to be a broad term representing all efforts to support underrepresented voices in staff, audience, artists, and board members of arts and cultural institutions. We aren't specifically naming the words equity or access in our acronym, but we do mean to be inclusive of all these efforts. And second, in the US, the term BIPOC is emerging. It stands for Black, Indigenous, and People of Color. This is a term that our organizers and activists have suggested we all use, so we are using it here. In the UK, there is a term in contrast called BAME. It stands for Black, Asian, and Minority Ethnic. This came from the government as a way to track metrics, and while it's still used for tracking purposes, it's not necessarily the terminology of choice. So while we may refer to it, it's not the term that we're going to be using to refer to individuals. We'll be talking about BIPOC. Last, we talk about diversity in the board, and we mean diversity of all kinds. Race, gender, disability, LGBTQ, age, skills, capabilities, perspectives, and experience. I think that's a pretty comprehensive list, but there may be more. So we'll be talking much more with our panelists about how they have set their goals and defined diversity in their own boards. So I think that covers terminology, but please contribute in the chat if you think I missed anything or have any questions about the terminology that we are using. And last, but certainly not least, before we dive into the conversation, I wanted to highlight one resource we are launching today, our consultant and vendor compilation. As I mentioned, we were having these conversations with our members, and one of the challenges that they brought up with us was the challenge of finding a consultant or vendor to support their training or strategy setting efforts in DE&I. In some cases, that's because the few names they reach out to, the more familiar ones, are overbooked because there's such strong demand right now. In other cases, they struggle to find someone who is a good fit for their organization's specific needs. So we're taking advantage of the broad network that we have here at the Advisory Board for the Arts. And we've created this short survey that we're asking arts executives to fill out about their experience with DE&I consultants. Sort of what support you received, your recommendation of that person, what region you believe they work in. We'll take a quick look through this and then pull it all together into a resource for those who participate and of course our members. The link is active here, I believe. Yeah, Pope just forwarded it, so thank you. And then we will also send an email to our mailing list with more details, but I encourage you to fill this out. It's a great opportunity to lift the voices of those who you've worked with and make others more aware of their capabilities. All right, so I am delighted now to turn back to our panelists for the rest of our time this morning, or afternoon for many of you. As I mentioned, we have Delia, Matrice, and Debbie here. And I, first of all, just want to thank you for joining us today. I'd love to start with a quick introduction from each of you. Just let us know a bit more about your background and organization, as well as maybe a high level information about your board as it stands right now. And I will start with Delia, if you don't mind coming off mute and letting us know a little bit about yourself.
Hi everyone, and thank you very much for asking me to do this panel. And it's really amazing to see so many people from so many places in the world, so it's fantastic, thank you. So a little bit about me. My role is Programs Director at the Roundhouse, and what that essentially means is that I oversee a number of our program areas, one of those being our work with 11 to 25-year-olds from socially challenged backgrounds or economically deprived backgrounds. I oversee the work of our artistic work that happens with, and I do that with our artistic director. And then I oversee our commercial music program, which we have had on pause since mid-March. Very much my background has always been in sort of working at strategic level with management. And so sort of that's what I came to the Roundhouse, and really specifically to look at how we work with the constituency that we have said we want to, in terms of our audiences, but also in terms of the young people that we work with. So at the moment, our board is our board. I joined the company at the same time as our new chair, or the new chair joined at the same point. So we're both 3 and a bit years into being at the Roundhouse. And there were some board changes that naturally come along with a new chair, but pretty much we're a board of about 20 people, mixed diversity across the board, which I'll talk about a bit later. And that board very much is maybe different. So we often talk about sort of the American model, and we have quite a few Americans, or we had quite a few Americans on our board. We have one at the moment. We talk about our board is not, it's not a kind of, you know, come on and give board. It's a very mixed board of expertise, ability to generate income, generate donations. We also have two young board trustees that we recruit from our youth strategy board. And so there are two young under 25-year-old trustees who have full trustee capacities, but we support them into that role so they can move on. So the board's very much mixed up of different types of people. I'll leave it there because I'm aware of time, but questions can come.
That's great, thank you. And I'm sure we'll get into the origins of that as well. Love to turn next to Matrice, if you can do a quick introduction.
Thank you so much. And thank you for doing this and inviting Debbie and me to participate with you all. Matrice Ellis-Kirk, and I chaired, past tense, the board of the AT&T Performing Arts Center. My tenure just ended, so I'm getting used to saying chair emeritus. But by background, I've been an advocate in the arts and education realm in Dallas and in its region, and even across the state at some level for quite a few years. The focus has been, you know, how we engage in art and how art and education actually creates this next generation of leaders, both in the art world as well as the business world. And so starting off in my tenure, early tenure, was on a number of the boards for other arts organizations. And then I chaired the board of our high school for the performing arts. And then coming out of that, did come over and became the chair at the AT&T Performing Arts Center.
Thank you. And last but certainly not least, Debbie, can you introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you. It is such an honor to be here today and on this panel with Delia and with Matrice. So my background is in business. I actually was with AT&T. I retired in 2016 after 34 years with AT&T. The majority of my time at AT&T was running large operations. So that has contributed to my ability to step in and run this organization. But at one time, I was also the Chief Diversity Officer, actually for 3.5 years. So the Chief Diversity Officer and the head of talent management and our corporate university. I retired in 2016. Excuse me. Excuse me. Matrice was the board chair at the time. And I actually moved from Dallas, Texas with my husband to St. Petersburg, Florida. Matrice, being the incredibly persuasive leader that she is, convinced me to not only stay on the board, but to consider stepping in as interim CEO. So I agreed to step in as interim CEO for a few months, and that was almost 3 years ago. So
not so interim anymore.
Yes. So that's my background. I actually joined the board of the AT&T Performing Arts Center when AT&T relocated me to Dallas. And they asked me to take the AT&T seat on the AT&T Performing Arts Center board. So I had been on the board of an arts organization in every city that I had lived in, and was absolutely thrilled to take this board seat. And when I retired from AT&T, I continued on as an independent director. I have great passion for the organization. A large part of that is due to how the organization has grown under Matrice's leadership. So. And I continue to be just as passionate about it today as I was when I first joined the board.
Well, I know we'd love to hear the journey of, as you said, the organization has grown. It sounds like the board has changed as well. Matrice, perhaps you can start us off with the story of the changes in the board at AT&T Performing Arts Center.
Right. Yeah, and you know, Debbie is being super kind, but she had as much to do with the structure changes as a board member when we first started. But you know, it was interesting because when I was invited to come on as chair, and we looked at the makeup of the board, we had a tremendous board, a tremendous working board, and a group that was completely engaged at many levels. But what it lacked was diversity in terms of gender, ethnicity, and also thought. So, you know, we looked at it through the lens of zip codes within our region. So it was heavily geared towards 2 zip codes in our area. So we really wanted to explore that. We also looked at in addition to gender, we also looked at LGBTQ as well in terms of what that makeup looked like. And from there, we really decided that the board is the face in so many instances in these organizations, and it's what drives conversation around programming and all of the other aspects that it represents in the community. And we said, let's look at this through the lens of increasing zip codes, increasing ethnicity, increasing LGBTQ, increasing differences in income structure as well. And so it was part of my top 3 things that I was going to do. And upon taking over the role, it was my #1 initiative to diversify our board and to make it look like Dallas, so that then we could explore some of the other opportunities that could exist for those communities.
Many organizations set a goal to change the makeup of the board, but run into a number of challenges along the way. Would love to hear a little bit about how you began that, journey. Once you had set those goals of increasing zip codes, income structure, LGBTQ, and racial makeup, how did you think about, what was the first thing that you did to really advance the changes to the board structure?
So we built a skills matrix for our board. And we looked at the skills that we have, the number of attorneys that you have on your board, the number of business people, educators. You can go across the spectrum of looking at the various skills development, policy, governance, all of the skills that you would need to make a high functioning board. And then within those skills, then identifying individuals in the community that would have those skills and begin cultivating relationships. You can't just go and say, I need this person on the board if they've never engaged in the organization or have had a way to see themselves in that organization. You never want to create tokenism. And that's really important and something that we really focused on. So it was not unusual for Debbie and a number of other board members to engage by taking that person to lunch, inviting them to something at the center, and creating a way in which they will have connectedness to what we were trying to do and what we were trying to accomplish. It was important to have a vision and to share that vision of what you saw in the center and how it would look and how that journey would come about and how they could be a part of it. I think one of the most important things that Debbie and I do is that it's not just about us. We really do bring the leaders in and allow them to lead, allow their voices to be heard, whether it's through the committees, voicing at the board, participating in our programming committee in terms of what you'd like to see, but asking those questions of those individuals.
Debbie, would love to know if you have anything to add to that. In particular, right, has there been any moments where it felt like it was a challenge to allow those folks to, the new board members who are representative of a broader set of individuals to have their voices be heard? Any ways that you navigated some of those challenges? Oh, sorry, you're still on mute. There we go.
I'll say a couple of things about that, and in particular about the role that Matrice has played in diversifying the board. She became chair-elect in 2014, 2015. And at the time, as she said, the board was not diverse at all. And she really pretty quickly began to change how board members were sought out and recruited. She just talked about a little bit about that, but that there was a methodical and well thought out strategy to how she approached potential board members and recruiting board members. She made a key change to the Nom and Gov committee. She placed a woman of color on the committee, and then she ultimately appointed that person to be the chair of the committee. That became a really critical turning point as well for the organization. One of the things that Matrice consistently, it takes a little while. You have to get some key members, key diverse board members on the board in order for other diverse candidates to be interested in joining the board. And I think, my observation was that Matrice was really strategic about some of the people that she initially brought onto the board, including the person that she put as the chair of the Nom and Gov committee. But she brought diverse candidates onto the board who had a real immediate impact. So an immediate impact in terms of fundraising, bringing huge corporate partnerships to the center, significant sponsorships to the center. And so, demonstrating that there was value in bringing diverse candidates onto the board and that they could immediately have a value made a big difference. I think that began sort of the turning of the flywheel for the board to understand the value of a diverse board. And that it had nothing to do with tokenism. It had everything to do with bringing people to the board who could have a significant impact. And I'll say the other thing about Matrice is that she and the Nom and Gov chair, as well as some of the other initial diverse candidates that she brought onto the board, really had deep connections in the African-American business, political, and philanthropic communities. And that helped as well. There was huge trust. If Matrice asked someone to join the board, they were inclined to agree. and then you asked about challenges, and I think Matrice would never ever complain about some of the challenges that she faced, but I saw it very clearly. There were so many board members who got on board immediately with Matrice's goals of diversifying the organization, but not 100%. And she faced some challenges. I think she faced some tough conversations with some board members, and I think at times some of her decisions were challenged, but she had such conviction about what she was trying to do and that it was the right thing to do that she persevered and won people over. And I'll give the final statistic. At the time that Matrice became the board chair, the board was 13% diverse. Today it's 36% diverse. It is, if not the most diverse board in the city of Dallas, it has been, and it is still one of the most diverse boards, with the exception of culturally specific organizations. So what she's been able to accomplish in her term is pretty incredible.
Yeah, I think somebody brought up a really important point around a lot of this is that, the board is a group of individuals that are peers, and they see themselves that way. And they lead that lens as well.
I would love to ask one follow-up question and then turn to Delia and hear her journey as well. It sounds like it was a journey not without challenges and moments where perhaps you had to make some trade-offs that were painful in that moment, including possibly really tough conversations with board members. How about on the positive side? Have there been any moments that have catalyzed the value to your organization of the board diversity? Any stories you can tell of what has really helped your organization run differently because of it?
Debbie, you want to talk about ArtsBridge, perhaps?
Sure. So actually, I could tell a number of stories. ArtsBridge is one of them, but one of our strongest board members is from a major corporation. Should I talk about Toyota in the city of Dallas. And he brought a partnership. He brought to us at Challenge, actually. And he said, we want an opportunity. We have this community in West Dallas that doesn't, many of the people in that community have never even been to downtown Dallas, let alone had the opportunity to see live performing arts in any way, in any form. And he said, they can't all make it into downtown Dallas. I want to partner with you to find a way to take art to the community, to meet them where they are. And so we formed this partnership, and we have now for the past 2 years developed so first of all, let me say, we didn't, this is a very important point when it comes to diversifying programming and reaching diverse communities. We didn't sit in our center and decide what we thought we should take out to that community. We went out into that community and we listened to them. And we said, what would be meaningful to you? What kind of programs would you like to see? And then we built the program around those interests and those requests. So we have this amazing partnership now, ArtsBridge by Toyota, where we take art out into the community, and it is incredible to see the impact that it has when we take live performing art and immersive types of live performing art out into that community. So that's an incredibly successful story about one of our diverse board members. It's also, we'll talk a lot on this call about the diversity of the board makeup, the diversity of staff, but diversity of programming is incredibly important too. And that's a huge role, a huge impact that our diverse board has been able to have, helping us understand what kind of diverse programming we need to put on our stages to reach members of the community and parts of the community that we haven't necessarily been able to reach in the past.
And I wanted Debbie to specifically talk about ArtsBridge because it was not something that our board was familiar with in terms of us taking arts to the community and allowing that community to determine what type of art we should provide, because part of our structure and strategy was all around quality of programming. Quality of programming, those words can mean a lot of things, and when you unpack them, quality sometimes can prohibit you from actualizing real diversity. So, when we start to determine what quality is, you have to go to your communities and really understand what it is that they want and how you can best provide them that service and still do it in a way in which they can see quality and have the same kinds of experiences that your valued customer base from a donor standpoint had seen in the past, so that they too become your most quality and most valued community.
Yeah, it sounds like there are a number of assumptions behind the idea of quality, and there are different assumptions for different groups, and people take their own assumption and apply them to everyone else. And so how you're balancing that set of assumptions is a tough navigation for sure. Well, thank you. I would love to hear a similar journey from Delia, if we may. I'll switch back to your page here. Actually, maybe probably the best thing for me to do is stop sharing so we can all see each other's faces a little bit closer here. Delia, if you can start from the beginning. You have an unusual composition, at least when one considers it from the perspective of a US board. How has it always been that way, and how has the board changed over time?
Yeah, I mean, I would say before I joined, so my understanding of the history before I joined the organization is that, the original, I guess the setup and the driving motivation for the board was, the Roundhouse went through a huge £30 million refurb, and that was very much a board that was brought together to drive that income, to drive the completion of a huge building project and to get the building open and get that, you know, get that set up. And it was for a very long time, it was made up of, it was a much bigger board than it is now, and it was made up of probably what you would expect to see, if I could be so rude, but what you might expect to see of an organization that is not only forming but lobbying, advocating, and trying to place itself in amongst some of what I'd call the big boy organizations as it was growing. We have a very unique factor for, I think, in this scenario, in that Marcus, who is the chief executive, has been the only chief executive since the beginning. So, and that's really important in this respect, because he has seen the needs of the organization change in terms of what the board needs to look like, and has always worked really closely with the chairs to be able to adjust the board at whichever point that has needed to happen. So as I mentioned earlier, I joined the board at the same point as Simon Turner, who is now our current chair. And very quickly, it was clear that the time that we were in as an organization was one where we needed to be more relevant and reflective of the communities we were serving, but also of the conversations we're trying to have. We're a very value-based, value-driven organization, and that we needed to basically be able to be seen and it be clear that we were kind of putting our money where our mouth was in terms of the leadership of the organization. So when immediately as I joined, and so I'm the only senior director, I'm only director of colour in the organisation, but there are other members of colour within the board. But as I immediately joined the nominations committee, which was quite interesting because it'd been my first nominations committee that I joined. My previous role, I was director of English National Ballet School. It's a very different type of process in terms of, and rationale around bringing people on board. I very quickly came into the Roundhouse into an already established set of diversity criteria that we were trying to fill. We were already aiming for, so this is 2017, we were already aiming for gender parity on the board. We were already, had already at that point set a diversity target of 13% BAME, and we were already driving against some of those targets when I joined. So the nominations process was the committee process was very interesting, because it would start from, and this is some reflecting of some of what we've already heard, start from a basis of what are the skills we're trying to recruit, and then where are we looking to recruit those skills. And I would say probably most of what we did was or what I can say I brought to it. And I firstly really cannot take credit for the diversification of the board, because it's definitely a team effort. But most of what we did was start to say, well, which names, who are we looking at, and what are the different networks throwing up in terms of who we know. We were quite specific about saying we were looking for gender parity. We were quite specific around saying we were looking for Black or Asian board members. We were really fortunate. So that point that I think it maybe Debbie, you made that, or maybe Patrice, I can't remember, sorry, but about board members looking to see who's on your board before they join was really, really important. But for us, much more from a value perspective. So they wanted to see the values we espouse played out on the board before they would consider joining, before that cultivation started. So we were able to, you know, it sounds really blunt, so please forgive me, but if I looked around our board, if I say we hit more than one characteristic in terms of diversity than we were aiming for, by being open about what we were looking for, and by people trusting and saying, well, actually, I will join this board. Now, I happen to come from another protected characteristic other than being female or being Black, or there may be other things I bring to this, but I'm happy to bring my whole self to the board. And so we were really lucky, and our chair and our CEO, as two middle-aged white men, worked very openly and very clearly about their drive to diversify the board, that this was an absolute necessity. So fast forward to the events, and we'll touch on this maybe, but George Floyd murder, it just crystallized. Actually, we just looked at our targets and said, well, we've met them, so how do we push forward some more? Actually, how do we be very specific? So I like what someone said earlier about looks like Dallas. We've been talking about looks like London and feels like London, and somebody reporting back to us that when they walk into our venues to see a show, it feels like London. And we've been talking about how does it feel like London when you walk into the boardroom, and how does it feel like London when you apply for a job and you join as a member of staff. So that kind of driving diversity in order to reflect our constituency in our community and our values is really, really key. I'll say just two quick other things. Just around the quality of programming and the quality of what we do. We get pushed. So I think I mentioned earlier, we have 2 young people on our board. And so we have a process at the Roundhouse where we have had young people on our board of trustees for the past 12 years. And every year we recruit two young people from our youth advisory board. They go through a full interview process with myself and the chief executive and another board member. They are inducted as fully fledged board members and they participate as fully fledged board members. There's no dumbing it down because they are younger people or they may not understand necessarily all of the structures. Our chair is really, really clear about their position even their position in the boardroom. They are directly facing the chair. They're the first report we come to. Their voice must be heard at all point. If they're a little bit too quiet, he will find a way to make sure that they speak. And one of the things that they challenged us was whose version of quality are you trying to deliver as an organization? And so it's really interesting because that diversity of thought in the room is really key. I cannot push it. I speak a lot about the diversity. I'm really a champion for cultural diversity and race diversity, but the diversity of thinking in the room is so key to organizations' resilience and ability to even pivot in a strange time as we're in. Yeah, I'm going to leave it at that.
Well, you both, all 3 of you have now referred to this kind of chicken and egg problem you can have, which is wanting to have a diverse board, but the first few members who might not see themselves on the board as it stands initially need to be persuaded that this is the place for them to have an impact. And you talked about demonstrating the values. Can you talk a little bit more concretely? And maybe Debbie and Matrice will come back to you as well about what persuaded those individuals. What was either this demonstration of the values, how did that manifest itself, or what kinds of conversations did you find most helpful to get people to believe that this was the right place for them to have an impact?
I think there's no blanket answer to that. I think it really depended on the individual we were approaching. So I think each cultivation is very personal. So some of our new board members were very interested in what we were doing around access and disability, and they wanted to see that it was more than lip service. So there was a lot of understanding what kind of programs we were running, who was in our organization, what some of the challenges were. We wanted, the values came around honesty. The values came around integrity as an organization. They wanted to see not just the glossy brochure, this is how we've done, this is how fantastic. They really wanted to understand where the challenges were and what they, we're asking people, everybody that joins a board for me is already busy. They're already busy because they're already the type of people that would join a board or would do whatever you ask them to do, will do it well, even if they've never been on a board before. So they want to know, they wanted to really understand why this organization and why my time. And as I say, some of that was around access and disability. Some of it would be around cultural and racial diversity. Some was around, what are you really doing in terms of economic diversity, and how are you really addressing, what are your outcomes, what are your future hopes, what are your challenges? So a lot of conversations that we led, and we would sometimes not, the cultivation wouldn't always happen from the top. So we would invite them into the organization. They would speak to staff from across the board to ask the questions. Nobody was briefed on what they should or shouldn't say because we wanted to be honest about what the sum of this job would look like as a trustee. So I think, like I say, not one particular way of doing it, just to really kind of our values around transparency, honesty, diversity, and collaboration, and those really coming through depending on the you know, everybody's got a yes factor, the thing that you need to tick or click, and you know, just trying to understand what that is for that individual.
Debbie or Matrice, anything to add in terms of what was most persuasive for you?
I will, I'll add a couple of things. One, very much agree with everything Delia just said, that it's an individual and a personal decision. And so those personal relationships make a difference. But I'll say for us, I'd say three key things that were very persuasive to candidates who were being recruited to join the board. One is everyone absolutely understood Matrice's commitment to diversifying the board. So, you know, there was no doubt, there was high trust about her commitment to build a diverse board, not just, you know, to count the statistics, but to really diversify thought and thought leadership. Number two, I think diverse candidates, one of the key things that Matrice did early on was place diverse candidates in leadership positions on the board, so that diverse candidates saw I'm not just being asked to join a board so that I can sit around a table and be counted as a diverse board member. I'm being asked to join because they need my voice at the table. And I'd say the third thing that was really compelling, and perhaps the most compelling, is this passion and determination that we've had at the center to be a true gathering place for the community, and not just segments of our community, but to the entire community. And we weren't at one time. We were seen, you know, we're an a beautiful, gorgeous, iconic opera house and iconic buildings, and we were seen as being a little bit intimidating and not really serving all the community. And we have a huge passion and determination to be a gathering place for all of the community. And I think diverse, potential diverse board members and our existing diverse board members, who doesn't want to be a part of that, right? And so I think that was has been really compelling as well.
Yeah, everything that both Delia and Debbie has said is spot on. You know, today we're at a place where people are asking us, I want to be on your board. How do I get on your board? You know, we've created a young auxiliary group that are young. They have an ex officio position on the board, so that they too can sit at the table. So, you know, once you bring people on who believe in what you're doing, and I think that's another key part when you listen to Delia and Debbie, in attracting those individuals, we're taking the time to understand what are they interested in, what do they want to do, how do they want to participate, and finding a way for us to align what their wishes are to what we're trying to accomplish. So there are people, quite frankly, that we thought about that we wanted for the board, but after having conversation with them, it wasn't going to be the right person. And you want everyone to bring everything with them. I wanted people who were unapologetically Latino, unapologetically LGBTQ, unapologetically Black, so that when they shared that voice, you saw the passion that they had with their experience, and you saw the value that they brought to the table. And when they sat at the table, they were peers across the spectrum: white, Black, brown, green, yellow, whatever. It was a group of peers trying to accomplish something beautiful for our cities and for our citizenry. And so that was really a big part of what we were doing.
One quick question for you, and then I'm going to come back to Delia. I realize we need to complete that journey and understand a little bit more about where she's headed. But there's been a question around how long it took. So can you let us know when you made the determination to change the zip codes, et cetera, and then until now?
Geez, I think I've almost forgotten. I think I started in 15 or something.
Yes.
Around that time frame.
Okay.
Exactly.
And so we began that process. That first year, I think we brought on maybe 5 diverse executive individuals or thereabouts. So it wasn't just a class of 1, which was the other thing that was important. So we added more each year. In my first year, with the help of the executive committee, we changed out after that first year the leadership in various committees as well. So that was something that started rather quickly. So it's been an iterative process, but it's taken a good 4 years, 5 years.
Thank you. And Delia, to the extent that you can tell us about the timeline, I'd love to hear it. And there have been a number of questions which was going to relate to the question I was going to ask you myself, which is, you mentioned the board was set up to as a fundraising entity in addition to a governance one, right? Is with a big renovation happening at that time. There's a perception often of trade-offs, and there's a lot of questions here around financial requirements, minimal give-gets. So curious from you, and then I'll come back to Debbie and Matrice, if you have faced that trade-off, how you've handled that trade-off, if that has been a challenge in terms of having a diverse board and financial and meeting financial goals with the board.
Yeah, so no, there hasn't been a trade-off,
Okay.
quite simply, because the requirements of the board has changed. And so we, at the point when I joined the board, what we needed was some advocacy and lobbying capacity as an organisation to really get ourselves on the government's radar around the work with young people. We needed, obviously we always need fundraising. We have a 3 million or something plus fundraising target per year, plus we are building something else in our car park. So we're always in fundraising mode. So we have a separate committee for that. We have a development committee where members are co-opted on. They are really good at getting and making the ask. And so that is their only focus. They're not distracted by anything else. They will go out, we do the dinners, we do the cultivation events, people give to feel good. And it's great because it goes to that, and they don't have to necessarily get pulled into the governance so much of the organisation. But we do have full trustees who fundraise. In fact, our chair is a phenomenal fundraiser, and he set us challenges around making £1 million and so on. It's really great. So that happens. So it's never stopped us in terms of diversifying the board because we need a diversity of skills and we need a diversity of things brought to the board. I would say we really part of the diversity of the board really did up. So roll forward 3 years, we have really cemented our voice within government, and we are trying to be the go-to organisation when it comes to arts and young people. And that was a very clear outcome we wanted, and we needed to diversify the board in respect of that. Now that came with some diversity, as I said, when people meet other characteristics, but we really wanted to start from a skills base, and I urge that because I've been on a number of boards, and I'm a chair of another board in my other life, and there's nothing more for me depressing than people recruiting for diversity without the skills being the lead thing, because you're just setting people up to fail. And that's why it's the easy excuse to give people, well, we tried it and it didn't work, right? So I'm not bringing, whether that's recruitment for jobs or recruitment for board, for me, if the skills are there, and you make sure you're playing to that person's skills and their strengths and what they're bringing, then the diversity should be a massive, huge and beautiful bonus, because you can look in a diverse pool for the skills that you want. And I think that's much, and for me, sometimes it's not that complicated. It just gets made complicated by. So no, we don't have a minimum ask for people to get on the board at all. And I just saw a question pop up, which I'll tricky quietly answer, which was around how we set diversity targets. We started looking at, first of all, at our census information. And so we looked at what the population makeup was, and therefore what our workforce makeup should be, and therefore what we thought our board makeup, and how we wanted to reflect our board makeup in that respect. So we're currently, in terms of BAME, we're currently 29%. We want to shove that to 40%. We've met our targets, if you like, on specifically on Black members of the board. We're upping our targets on Black members of the board because the time politically is right, socially is right, but also we've met a target that we set, so let's increase the target. And so very much we are very explicit with staff and funders about what we are trying to do in terms of diversifying the board.
You know, it's fascinating because I would agree with all of those things, but what I've found as a result of diversifying our board, we've also diversified the way in which we get, and we don't have a policy as well. But before, we didn't go and actually get sponsorship for individual shows. As a result of diversifying our board, you had people who would say, if we can get this person, I'll help you get them. I will help underwrite the cost of that performance. So it made us get more creative in the ways in which we were actually engaging with individuals. So, and when I say diversifying, I'm going to also say, even within our white population, so this isn't just a Black, brown, or LGBTQ element, but there are people who give differently. And so what it did by moving out of our comfort zone in the way in which we recruited, in those questions, you also found out what people were interested in. And if they were that interested in it, they would sponsor it. So gala, some people want to sponsor for a big party. Some people want to do things that we just hadn't thought about. So it really helped us to think differently about the way in which we get, because our policy is we want you to give until it hurts. So that's our goal.
I know Delia has definitely a need to stop right at the hour. So keeping track of time, I want to ask one last question and get your piece of advice given this environment. So a couple of questions have been on the theme of communicating the commitment and genuine dedication of DE&I to the public. And you've all talked about how that's an important element about bringing on the first few, sort of changing the way that you define the board needs that you have from your board and bringing those first few people on. But even now, especially with increased scrutiny, how have you found it's most effective to communicate your genuine dedication to DE&I to the public? Either Debbie or Matrice, I'll let one of you start, whichever you prefer.
So number one, I think you communicate it through action, and that actions are more important than words. I think sometimes, when you lead with simply words, we've seen this over and over again, people are skeptical and even critical until and unless they see the actions that follow it. So for us, it's about leading with actions.
Sure.
And the actions to diversify our board, to diversify our staff, to diversify our programming. Matrice, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Well, sure. And actually, do you mind if I know, Delia, you have a hard stop. Maybe if you have any comments here, or if you want to give any last pieces of advice, if you prefer.
The communication, so we've just, what's happened in the UK following George Floyd's murder is a lot of organisations, particularly publicly funded organisations, went straight out with statements around their anti-racist commitments, and that led on to what what they were doing around diversity and inclusion. And we again, having diversity of thought and opinion in the room, we sat tight. It was really difficult to not jump in straight away, but we sat tight. We have a diversity and inclusion working group, which is a cross-organizational group in terms of hierarchy. And we really talked about what we wanted to put out. So by actions, when we are continuing to diversify by actions, but we've also put out an anti-racist, a commitment to anti-racism, where we have listed our commitments. I'm just going to post the webpage in here, and this is what we put out so that we can be publicly held accountable, and we are encouraging our participants and our audiences to hold us accountable to our pledges, and that's how we're trying to move forward.
Thank you so much, Delia. I really appreciate it, and I know you may have to go a few moments early.
Yeah,
I'll turn back to Debbie and Matrice for any final thoughts. First of all, Matrice, you may have had additional thoughts on what Debbie said before, but also any advice you might have.
I'll do what both of them said.
Okay.
No
Sure.
need.
Okay. How about any
I'll
last
just
thoughts for,
add-
especially in this moment of so many tough trade-offs happening at the board level as organizations are facing shrinking budgets given the shutdowns? Any advice for people who are maybe not as far along in the journey as you are for how to stay motivated and committed, or how to improve board diversity?
Yeah, I would say it's an iterative process first and foremost. None of this can get done overnight. It didn't start overnight, so it didn't happen this way overnight. So, stay with the focus and keep the vision clear in terms of what you want to do, and understand that it may not work every single time. But you take those moments that are wins and make them work. The best thing that we did was also make certain that our programming diversified. So when you looked in the audience and you saw people who looked like you or didn't look like you, and you said, wow, how did this happen? So you bring in people so that you can have different experiences. And when those experiences are positive, it does create a desire to be more broad in every aspect.
Debbie, how about you? Any advice beyond what Matrice just said?
I'll just say, and this goes back to some degree to my experience in as a chief diversity officer. Don't ever believe that just because you've communicated the value of diversifying, that people get it the first time. I think you have to keep communicating that over and over again. I think you have to help people understand that a board should reflect the community that it is serving and why that's important, and then demonstrate the value that comes from that diversification.
Thank you so much. And Delia, I know, had to go, in fact, to a board meeting. So glad that, thank you, Debbie and Matrice, for all of your insights. I want to just wrap up with 1 or 2 moments here. First, as I mentioned, we are recording this and the replay will be available likely tomorrow on our website, and all of you will have been signed up for our newsletter by joining our webinar today. And so you'll receive the recap in the email that goes out on Monday. In addition, I'd love to get your feedback on this session so that we can continue to improve our sessions in the future. And while you are filling that out, a final set of thanks to Debbie, Matrice, and to Delia in absentia. I'm so grateful to you for sharing your journey, both being honest about the challenges that you have faced as well as the lessons learned, so the rest of the people on the line here today have an opportunity to gain from your insights. Thank you so much for your time today. And thank you everyone for joining us. Look forward to seeing you in about 2 weeks for our next webinar.
Thank you all.
I will stay on the line just so you can finish filling out the poll, but Debbie and Matrice, feel free to drop off, and everyone else as well. We'll call this the end, and thank you very much.
Thank you both.